How much propane do you need to keep on board? Hi, I'm Carolyn Sherlock, and on this episode of the Boat Galley Podcast, I'll share some tips for making sure you never run out of propane on your boat. This episode of the Boat Galley Podcast is sponsored by Shambhala Sailing Adventures, offering customized learning charters in the Exumas, Bahamas. Sailor like your owner with coaching from Captain Suki Cannon. Contact her at captainsuki@gmail.com. That's CAPTAINSUKY@gmail.com. Mention this podcast for 10% off. Trying to figure out what size and how many propane tanks you need on your boat? Well, that depends on the size, how much, and what types of cooking you do, and so on. But a basic rule of thumb is 1 pound per person per week of full-time living. Now that assumes average amounts of cooking and baking. That's with few to no electrical appliances such as coffee makers or microwaves. No particularly cold weather where you cook or bake for long periods just to warm up the boat. And no propane refrigeration. Just for example, with a small propane refrigerator, we used a little over a pound a day for 2 people. Okay, the larger the number of people, the less per person you're likely to use, as cooking time isn't perfectly proportional to the amount cooked. And single-handers may go through a bit more. But for most families, 1 pound per person per week is a good starting point. Now, many boats use 20-pound tanks, but note that if you do a tank exchange at a store, which is common in the U.S., it's generally only filled with 15 pounds. I get about 2.5 months from one of these 15-pound tanks, and just over 3 months with a full 20-pound tank. Some boats use 10-pound tanks to make them easier to carry for refills or exchanges. And I've seen a couple of boats who also have propane refrigeration, which I really don't recommend after our experience with it, that have 40-pound tanks. So a 20-pound tank is pretty standard, but it's not universal. Whatever size tank you get, I strongly recommend having 2 tanks so that you can swap tanks instantly when one becomes empty. I swear they always go empty at the least convenient times. The spare tank needs to be kept where any leak will not drain into the boat. For us, our propane locker holds 2 tanks. We also do have a gauge on the propane line, which helps us to know that a tank is getting low. A gauge isn't strictly necessary, but if I'm baking something like bread or a cake where having the tank go empty in the middle would cause funny results, and not just a delay, I'll check the propane level before lighting the oven and change the tank if it's virtually empty. The gauges may not be perfectly accurate, but we've had very good luck with them being close to correct. And some brands get much better reviews than others. And when we see the needle starting to drop, we double check that the spare tank is, in fact, full. All it takes is one morning without coffee, and you'll never forget to check again. This has been the Boat Galley Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends.
Slow